The other day, someone asked if I could make a video about snakes that don't necessarily have to eat rodents and live a long life. Because as we all know, there are some snakes like rough green snakes and garter snakes that if they are fed like goldfish and crickets and minnows, that they don't really live very long because there are some inherent problems with that. So today I'm going to do a video about 5 snakes that can eat non-rodents almost exclusively their entire lives and live a very healthy life. Now, I know you guys don't necessarily like all the little fluff at the beginning, but there's a couple things I want to go over before I get into it. So the first thing is first, rodents, mice and rats, and to an extent like hamsters and guinea pigs and rabbits and things. Those are what we use and what we choose to feed most snakes because for a couple reasons. The first is it's easy and convenient. We've gotten very good at breeding rodents in close to sterile conditions. That way we can monitor the health of the animals and reduce the amount of parasites that might be present. And then the next one is that the other animals that we use that could be potential for feeders, like lizards and snakes and other animals like that, are harder to come by, really big vectors for diseases, so you kind of have to have like a large captive population, and it's a little bit more difficult. They don't breed as readily as quickly as rodents, and that's with most kinds of animals, and so that very much limits them. And then the last reason is when it definitely comes to like breeding and pairing for captive animals, because that's a pretty big mentality in the reptile hobby, good or bad, that if you're keeping reptiles, especially more uncommon or rare reptiles, that you should try to breed them so that way future generations can have them. And if you're feeding a snake that eats other snakes all the time, it does add some inherent risk when you put 2 of them together because, oh hey, that's another thing that could potentially be food instead of a potential mate. So, all of that out of the way of all the risks and the conveniences to why we do rodents over the other ones, blah, 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 let's get into it. So the first one is one that probably has come up on a couple of different videos. I haven't watched every single one out there, and that is the eastern hognose snake. So we all know about the western hognose, the cute little adorable pug-nosed little buggers that have taken over the internet and honestly the reptile hobby, and you're probably going to hear me say that every time I talk about hognose for the next couple of years. Those guys have gotten incredibly popular. And for a partially good reason. They are really cool type of snakes. The eastern hognose, which is a different species than the westerns, are a little bit different. They actually have a much wider and widespread range than the western hognose. They actually span basically all of the eastern part of the United States, from Florida going north up into Vermont and even to parts of Canada and Minnesota and as far west as into Kansas, parts of Texas, and yes, they have even been found in Colorado. Sorry, Colorado viewers that say that they're not native. Yeah. Now, they do have a whole lot in common with the western hognose. They still have that cute little piggy face they use to burrow in. They still are a fairly small size snake, that they have a pretty big amount of sexual dimorphism where males and females look different. The males are typically much smaller, the females are typically much larger, where the females average 2.5 to 3 feet, sometimes getting close to 4 feet, but the males usually staying under 2. They have a bunch of really funny like little defenses when it comes to being threatened by predators, so they puff up like a cobra, and then they spread out their neck like the cobra does, only they don't raise up. They can't actually physically raise up. So like the false water cobras and the western hognose, and the easterns are actually known more for this than the westerns, is they will spread their neck out like a cobra and they'll sit there and they'll do this, but on the ground to look intimidating. They'll also make the hissing sounds, and then they'll musk just like a whole lot of other species of snakes, and then the world famous playing dead or playing possum where they feign death. And pretty much every species of the hognose does that, with the exception of some of the Madagascar ones. And whether or not they in fact do that or not, it just hasn't been very well documented, and I haven't been able to find that. So if anybody has, let me know down below. But the easterns, the Mexicans, the southerns, the westerns, and the tricolors from South America all do play dead, in addition to the hissing and the puffing. Now, these guys are a rear fang venomous species of snake. There has never been a medically significant bite that required a potentially life-ending event or a bite, just like the western hognose, just like most of the other species of rear fang venomous snakes. We're not counting the boom slang. And they are a little bit more difficult to breed. So number one, is that these guys, just like the westerns, really love frogs. That's their preferred prey in a good majority of their habitat. And even though these guys have been found in swamps and savannas and grasslands along main roads all over the place, they do typically really love to eat frogs and toads. And in captivity, we have a really hard time switching them over to rodents. So because of that, and the fact that even though they're incredibly variable, there are yellows and reds and oranges and browns and grays and blacks and all these different colors in between that vary throughout their range and their habitat and different types of localities, as well as just in individual populations, there aren't really any true morphs that have really been established. So they're not as popular, and the westerns have an easier time switching over to rodents, thus making them a much more popular pet than the easterns, which is somewhat unfortunate. That being said, they have been doing a lot of studies with the westerns. They have been showing that a more varied diet, including either frogs, frog legs, feeder toads, or reptilinks that contain those. So the reptilinks, that's the little brand of food, like little sausage for your reptiles that have different prey items instead of just the plain rodents that people sometimes feed, have led to healthier, long-lived animals in the western hognose species. So if you're looking to get an eastern hognose and you want to try to get closer to the natural diet or to vary it up from rodents, if you have one that actually got on rodents, reptilinks or feeder frogs and toads do exist. I know that green tree frogs are often one that are used by a lot of people who do eastern hognose, dragon snakes, and even some of the old world rat snakes like the rhino rat snakes that really prefer not mammalian for their first few feedings. Next on the list is one that is actually really common. It's one of the most common species of snakes kept in the hobby worldwide, and that is king snakes. Now, there are over 25 different species of king snakes, and they widely vary in both size, diet, coloration, and personality, from the smallest little scarlet king snakes all the way up to, the very large king snakes, over larger than 5 foot long, like some of the California king snakes. Now, they do vary, again, in size, in coloration, in habitat, and prey preference. Like the scarlet king snakes don't do super well in captivity, whereas some of the other king snakes will eat basically anything, and that's why they have their name, king snake. They're the king of snakes. They eat other species of snakes. And that is something that I know people will do. For instance, a lot of ball python breeders do sometimes, in fact, keep something like a king snake around to use for babies that don't make it out of the egg or fail to thrive, where it's kind of like a natural thing. It's like being on a farm, waste not, want not. I know that sounds kind of weird when we think about feeder snakes as people who keep pet snakes, but realistically, that is something that happens. For instance, a lot of young reticulated pythons and Burmese pythons who don't make it out of egg, they end up being king cobra food. It's all part of it, and that's actually something that does happen fairly regularly. And ball pythons do also become king cobra food. And out of all these different species of king snakes, there are even some that are very commonly kept in the hobby that actually do prefer, for a good majority of their lives, to not eat rodents. The biggest one is the gray-banded king snake. These king snakes are really cool. They're a smaller species of snake. They come from southwestern part of the United States and parts of Mexico, and they don't get very large. They're called Lampropeltis alterna for the alternating pattern, and these guys are highly variable. And alterna people are crazy. They get down to like mile marker locality of stuff, which can be fairly accurate. There are a bunch of different phases and all these different crazy localities, but these guys are really preferred lizard eaters, and they will eat snakes too. So for instance, if you were to have a small colony of, say, mourning geckos or of anoles, of Mediterranean or house geckos, that could be something that you could use to feed. That way you had them indoors. You don't go out and wild collect it, just like we don't go out and collect field mice, rats, and rabbits for our ball pythons and boa constrictors. You wouldn't want to do that with anoles and Mediterranean house geckos if you lived in an area where they were heavily prevalent, like all throughout a lot of like the south part of the United States. You have a captive collection of them, and you have them breeding in a couple different vivariums. That way you would have a steady supply of captive-born, healthy, parasite-free animals to breed for your gray-banded king snake. Or again, potentially if you have a larger king snake, like a Mexican black king snake or a California king snake, you can use reptilinks that are made up of other ones. You can actually, there are places that you can buy feeder snakes, feeder lizards that are frozen thawed, thus eliminating most of those possible vectors for parasites, as well as you could also do the kind of, the farm ranch method that we talked about, where that you could take some of the failed breedings of other species of snakes and feed them to your California king snake, Mexican black king snake, yada, yada, yada. It's just one that, in all honesty, king snakes are some of the biggest generalists when it comes to smaller colubrids that we have in the hobby that would do very well on eating non-mammalian prey items the majority of their lifetime. But again, you also, if you were planning on breeding them, that's an added Next worry. One is a super common snake. It's actually the most common snake in North America. It's been in the hobby forever, but they just don't ever seem to get nearly as much hype as even other commonly kept North American colubrids like the corn snakes, and that's the garter snake. Now, garter snakes, as I said before, most common species of snake from North America. There are several different species. They basically range from Canada all the way down into Mexico, and there are some species that even get further south, but they're generally not included in that regular family or clade of garter snakes. Very, very common for the most part with some exceptions. They all have a lot in common. They have a fair amount of sexual dimorphism, again, just like the western and the eastern hognose snakes, where females are being considerably larger, usually more than 2/3 time larger. Most of the time they stay under 3 feet, but there are some exceptions, like the giant garter snake or the San Francisco garter snake, that sometimes females can get close to 5 feet. But overall, they're a fairly small colubrid. And despite the fact they're found all over the place, including like the terrestrials and the plains and the wanderings and the Pacifics and the Puget Sounds and all those ones, found in all these different habitats, a lot of the time you will find them within, a stone's throw distance of a water source, because these guys do like to eat fish, tadpoles, and different species of amphibians, like some salamanders, frogs, and toads. And so because of that, a lot of people, because they know, oh, hey, garter snakes eat fish, let's just give them goldfish or minnows if they're small. Well, the thing is that goldfish and minnows have a large amount of something called thiominase, and that can inhibit their growth and proper metabolism inside of snakes and other species of reptiles like turtles and lizards. So if you have a turtle or lizard or a garter snake or any other species of snake that's eating fish, you can't feed them heavily, or definitely not exclusively, goldfish or those rosy red or the minnows for their extended period of time. It will actually slowly harm and kill your animal. We don't want to do that. So when it comes to feeding different types of fish items, we're looking for something like mosquito fish or guppies or mollies and platies for smaller ones. And then eventually you can even get like the silver sides that are frozen. And for very large snakes, you can even do whole fish with the spines cut off, like small things like tilapia and things like that, or just sides of fish for things like cribos and other of those type of things. But the garter snakes will actually do very well on tadpoles. There are several different species of tadpoles that are sold for feeders. There are bullfrog tadpoles, leopard frog tadpoles, Creatures of Nightshade, who we did a podcast with, who does a very successful job on captive breeding dragon snakes who eat almost exclusively tadpoles and frogs, use green tree frog tadpoles. So that is something that you could ever decide to do, is you could have a couple leopard frogs or a small collection of leopard frogs, or green tree frogs might be a little bit easier, where you can just have a steady supply of those, as well as they would probably take, once the garter snake got a little bit larger, or you got as an adult, could readily feed on reptilinks, on scented things like lizards or anoles, geckos, and they could feed on frozen frog legs and things like that. Really, really cool species of snakes, the garter snakes. They are really cool. They're a little weird here in Colorado. There is like a bunch of little like weird gray areas with garter snakes. So I don't really get to work with them too much, other than just like finding them off the roads and moving them. Like they hang out by my pond a lot. And ribbon snakes are included in that as well. And honestly, a ribbon snake or a garter snake was compared to like a smooth green snake, who are almost always exclusively wild caught, and they supposedly eat almost nothing but insects out in the wild. And there are other species of snakes that do eat exclusively insects, like centipede-eating snakes and snail-eating snakes. I think that a garter snake would be a better alternative to something that can be kind of cool and be very brightly colored, like the red-sided garters or the blue-sided garters. Even more, that would be a really good alternative for a healthy, stable pet than like a rough green snake. As long as we're talking about green snakes, I'm going to give another one that would possibly be a better alternative to the almost exclusively wild-caught rough green snakes, and that is the Asian vine snake. Now, the Asian vine snakes are a lot of times wild-caught individuals as well, but they're usually a little bit more stable. Now, these guys come from Southeast Asia, hence Asian, and these guys look like very long green, sometimes brown vines. Asian vine snake, haha. They're found all throughout Asia. They're found basically from like India all the way over, all the way far as Eastern Asia into parts of like Thailand and areas like that. A lot of the time they're found in more rainforest areas, very leafy green habitats, where they're found basically from higher foliage up into the trees. And they have a whole bunch of adaptations that make it to where they blend in very well, both hiding from predators and camouflaging from prey items. They're very long and thin, bright green, but not always. Like I said before, sometimes they can be kind of like a more earthy, tree barky colored brown. They're actually sometimes can get up to 6 feet long, which you would have no idea, but they're always perched up. And arboreal species have a tendency to be much longer than we really think about, and Asian vine snakes are no exception. They have slightly keeled scales, as is with several of the different species of Old World rat snakes. They have very long, pointed snouts. They have large triangular heads in comparison to the very slender bodies, which aids into looking somewhat like, like a curled up new leaf. And if you look at their eyes, that's a very distinguishing feature about the Asian vine snake, is their kind of funky little head and then their weird eyes. Those horizontal pupils, those are made for better horizon panoramic sight. It allows light to come in at a much better angle in front and behind, so that gives that panoramic view. That's why a lot of like goats and livestock have those kind of horizontal eyelids to allow for better panoramic vision both behind and in front of them for predators. It doesn't allow for as good for light, so their vision is very poor above and below them. However, using their amazing adaptations of camouflage, they don't necessarily need to worry as much about above and below them, so that way they use that really good panoramic vision to actually see predators and prey that are right at eye line. More prey than predators, and they use their camouflage to avoid that. As I said, these guys are another rear-fang venomous colubrid species. There's never been a medically significant bite that's ever been recorded, and these guys are avid lizard eaters, because I know that's what we're waiting for me to get for as I sit here and talk about these guys in the wild. And so when you come in, we usually do have an easier time finding feeder anoles and geckos than trying to get something like the rough or the smooth green snakes to eat crickets and things. It's a little bit easier to get this larger, hardier animal on feeder lizards that we could have an easier time breeding captive breeded lizards than trying to get this wild-caught animal onto crickets, which are a little bit harder to do in the first place. I've been told by someone who's been working on breeding the larger different subspecies of these guys that the bigger ones do switch over to reptilinks. They have even sometimes taken small mice as well. But again, we're looking at animals that can basically exclusively eat non-rodent food. So something like an Asian vine snake might be a better alternative. Last and certainly not least, and yes, I did do this in this particular order for a reason, is not one specific species of snake, it's actually a whole genus. And that genus is Drymarchon, or the indigos and the cribos. So these are some of the largest colubrids in the New World. Basically, in North America, we have the indigos, and in Central and South America, we have the cribos. In the United States, the eastern indigo is the largest species of snake. They can get over 8 feet long. And down in South America, the yellowtail cribo is considered the longest one, where they have gotten over 9, 10, 11 feet long. And these guys, the Drymarchon in Latin means lord of the forest. So we talked about king snakes being the king of snakes. They eat the other ones. They are truly the lords of the forest. They are close to apex predators, where they eat literally everything. For instance, the eastern indigo has a recorded prey menu of well over 25 species. That is not limited to different species of rodents, different species of birds, different species of reptiles, including other indigo snakes, including king snakes, including venomous copperheads, water moccasins, eastern diamondbacks, baby turtles, baby alligators. And down in South America, you can obviously imagine that menu would be even more diverse. These guys have a natural immunity to a lot of different species of venom. For instance, the yellowtail cribos eat bothrops, or the lancehead vipers, down in Central and South America. So these guys will eat absolutely everything. They are an amazing, highly intelligent, active, fast metabolism species of colubrid snake. I say species, as I said before, there are quite a few different ones out there. These guys are not rear fang venomous. They're not even necessarily constrictors. They're just very strong, powerful jawed snakes that will overpower their prey items of all these different species. These ones are probably the ones that more than likely you will have the easiest time finding and will have the easiest time getting to eat different prey items because of how generalized they are, with the exception of obviously the gray banded king snake. Really, really cool species. They're really, really, really cool set of snakes. This is the dry marcon. Absolutely my favorite. I would take out my eastern indigo, but she's in shed right now and she really does not like being pulled out, so you just get to deal with all this old footage of her, as well as our friends from Braden Exotics, red-phased indigo, who I believe his name is Venom. I don't quite remember. Sorry, they have several, and we had one out for the videos of this one. That being said, just an amazing group of snakes in general. I keep wanting to say species. It's more than one species. Because I work so heavily with the eastern indigos, that's usually what I am going to. So, that being said, it's two. There's the whole list. We have the eastern hognose and westerns as well. The Asian vine snakes, different species of king snakes, more exclusively the gray banded king snake. The Asian vine snake, which there are South American vine snakes, but the Asian vine snakes are much more widely available, and we know a little bit more about them. And then the dry marcon genus. Hopefully you guys enjoyed today's video. Now I just want to again really reemphasize that there is absolutely nothing wrong with adding variety to your pet snake's diets. And in fact, some of my ball pythons and boas will eat quail. They eat frozen thawed and pre-killed mice, rats, and quail, with the exception of I think 3 individuals that only want to eat rats, and one only wants to eat mice, but that one's a little baby right now. So I try to get all of my animals on a different diet, despite the fact they're just ball pythons, boas for the most part. But that being said, 3, these different species, and these are not the only ones, there's other ones out there that I think would make a really good idea for someone who wants to get a species of snake as a pet, not necessarily most handleable when it comes to something like the Asian vine snake, but a pet snake that way they don't have to necessarily feed off rodents, even frozen thaw, because I understand that can be a bit of a turnoff for people. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. Sorry I got a little bit rambly there at the end. I always end up just kind of rambling over the dry marcon because I just like them so much. If there are any other type of videos you want to see me talk about, any other topics that you would like to hear me discuss, ideas for future videos, heck, we're kind of wrapped up our shorter podcast season. I need to start getting more people in line if I'm going to try to do a 3rd season of Keep Calm, It's Just a Snake podcast. So if there's any people out there that you would like to try to get me in contact with, that I could try to get in contact with, or heck, if some of you watching have something really cool that you're working on or just want to talk about, you can suggest yourself and we can have a conversation about that too. So hopefully you guys enjoyed today's video. It's been a long couple days. Hope you're having a great day, and we'll check you next time.